one of the things we've talked about before we get into the Hall of Fame, maybe we'll just kind of set the tone with this piece. One of the things I think we've talked about doing on the podcast is talking about Mike De Niro. And, he'll be going into the Curbstone Coaches Hall of Fame early May.
May 7th, I think is the date.
Maybe just real quick, talk about briefly him and what that means. And I know one of the things that you've always said is, can you believe he's only going in now?
Yeah.
Maybe just kind of touch on that before we get into maybe doing a deep dive on him and what that would look like.
I don't know what the answer is to the question of why is he going in at this late date, because Mike De Niro was an automatic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no question that he was an automatic as far as any Hall of Fame, whether it was Curbstone Coaches or Texas A&M or Chaney. What I know, as far as what I've seen in my lifetime, certainly I never saw Frank Sinkowicz play, George Pochner play, Frank McFee. But the best pound for pound football player that I ever saw is Mike De Niro. And I'm not going to preface that with at Chaney. I'm telling you, he's the best football player that I've ever seen.
Well, and I think there's we'll kind of leave it at that. Obviously, what year did he pass?
He passed in the spring of my senior year, which would have been 1970.
Okay. So, you're talking what we're saying is nearly 50 years after his passing, the local sports Hall of Fame Curbstone Coaches, nearly 50 years after kind of making it in. So obviously, that's the reference point there. And I believe his nephew, Mike, will be part of the induction process, is my understanding.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I know he was nominated by Matt Giambattista, who played baseball with him.
Yeah.
And my guess would be Macaulay Awnings, but I don't know that. It could have been.
I got you.
Could have been. I don't know that for sure. I know he was drafted by the Tigers, and he was like a phenomenal third baseman. Why he was not inducted shortly after his passing, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, maybe one of the things we'll do is, I bounced an idea past you and maybe talking to, kind of doing a little different concept of an episode of talking to a couple different people with different perspectives on him, because I was talking to Chip Zatello and he was talking about his baseball piece.
Yeah.
And some of the other funny stories that they had as high school kids, not dealing with sports, but just how tough he was.
I'm sure Chip played with him.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And he said he was a tough human being. So,
I have, like I told you before, I have countless stories from Jerry Angelo, who, I spend a lot of time with when we coached together at Syracuse. Some of it I could share, but there's other things that I wouldn't fit. But he just.
Hey, Braden, we have that DVD of De Niro, that one highlight film, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we even got a little bit of film to kind of put and share as well. That'll be kind of interesting. So we'll that's right around when your second grandchild will be.
Correct. Yeah, he's due the 5th, and
Okay.
His nephew Mike, Gary's son, is going to receive for him.
Mm-hmm.
Matt's the presenter, and Gary is going to accept, or I'm sorry, Michael is going to accept, and it's a long time coming, and I'm sure the family's very, very appreciative, and
yeah. Young Mike was a good player as well. Kind of got hit by the injury bug a couple times.
That's a fact. I mean,
baseball and football.
Yeah, and he gave us great production, and we had high hopes for him, and he got hurt
early
in the year.
So speaking of Hall of Fame, one of the things that you've been kind of talking about, we've been talking about behind the scenes, was the Chaney Hall of Fame, not just the Football Hall of Fame. Any thoughts or progress on that is up and coming?
Yeah, it's being resurrected now, and there's a committee being formed. Jim Mullally and myself are the two surviving permanent members of that committee. The licensure or whatever kind of expired when they went into that hiatus, and now it's being kind of brought back. And the current AD, Casey Bogard, is leading the charge on this. As a matter of fact, he just had okayed the assembly of the current members of the Hall of Fame being put on a permanent board that can be added to. So we had money left over from the last banquet, and we went ahead and got that. But the stage where we're at, there won't be a banquet this year, just because we started up in the time restriction. But like I said, there's a committee being formed, and should be up and running by the fall at least.
Okay. And then when was the first and the last classes? Because I think the Hall of Fame started a little bit maybe later than what I would have anticipated. For best guess, do you know when the Hall of Fame started?
Yeah, my father is in the first class, actually. I think it was it would have been 87. I want to say 87.
So almost 60 years. Chaney's in existence, then the first class.
Yeah.
And then when was the last class?
2010.
Okay.
So
I thought it was 9 or 10, right? So it was somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think it was 2010.
So, I guess one of the things is like, you would assume there's a lot of players in that first 60 years that maybe didn't get in. They, typically when you start a Hall of Fame, you have larger classes, get guys in. At the end, in a typical running year, how many guys did you induct, or athletes, females, males?
It was in the vicinity of 15.
Oh wow.
Okay.
On an average year.
On an average year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The last year actually is when some of my players in football were starting to surface. In football as well as in baseball and track and whatnot. I know that Matt Gilchrist went in, and Rick Havrillo went in. Rick went in as a multiple,
Mm-hmm.
football, basketball, and baseball. And Chris Samarone went in. So, and they were starting to pour in. The applications were starting to come in for my guys. And we were just at the stage as a committee cleaning up the era prior to that.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. And that's not saying that there might be someone out there that, when the applications hit the newspaper and the public and the internet, that there's someone that we missed. It because the committee set up that you could only operate on the information that's provided you. Okay. As a committee, we weren't looking through the annuals or newspapers and finding guys. Someone had to nominate somebody,
Right.
Fill out an application.
Right. So, yeah, I guess that was kind of my question was, if you got 60 years of the Hall of Fame not being in existence, there's probably, a mad dash to get guys or females or whatever that were missed and induct them.
Yeah.
And then really it only goes for about 20 years. So there's probably a lot of players that should be nominated by people doing homework.
Absolutely. That's why
modern and post eras.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There'll be such a flood, I'm thinking. And what we're trying to do now is not depreciate the current members,
Mm-hmm.
the members that have gone in, but we don't want we want to make sure it's defined. What the criteria is defined so that there's no doubt when someone goes in. And I'm not suggesting that there's a doubt about any of the current. I think there's 160 members in. So there's an answer to your question. You're averaging about 16.
Well,
no,
20 years, about 8. Well, you probably took a number in, and then probably
the first class. I mean, you think about the first class. I mean, you got Sienkiewicz, Pochner, McFee, De Niro. That's pretty impressive just right there. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think okay, so the problem is when you have that big gap, you're missing some people that should be honored, right? Both male, female, because I'm sure you're going to get some basketball players, some track, some females, baseball, softball, volleyball, everybody. So then you have 10 years off as well. So you got to make up that time, and then there's some guys and girls that haven't been nominated. So I guess that's kind of the thing is that may be tough there. Once again, you have to prioritize. Well, who's the first class back?
Yeah.
After inauguration.
And you're right, and that's a tall order, and that's where rightfully so. That's where the scrutiny comes in, and. What I really want to sell as far as people that qualify, because we got Chris Samarone involved legally, and having it's good that he's already a member. So we're going to kind of rewrite the bylaws and make sure that we have it defined so that there's no speculation. To be honest with you, the previous classes relied an awful lot on Red, Ed, and myself as far as saying, validating people going in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, when Red would talk or Ed would talk, it would be like, well, hey, you got to put this guy in. You know, I mean, there was an application on him, and there's stats on him and everything. And well, what do you think, Red? What do you think, Ed? And you know, when if they give the thumbs up, you know, then
How do you deal with, I'm not being difficult, but how do you deal with somebody that would say, well, you know what, I didn't quite get along with Coach Berdis, Coach Matey, and that's where the committee play comes in? You know, because let's be honest, as a coach, maybe you don't have the best relationship with everybody, and I'll speak personally.
yeah, yeah. There's no question that comes into play. Um, and that's why you have the committee, because it comes down to a majority vote.
Yeah.
You know, you vote on, you know, someone sells the kid. The application sells them, the stats sells them, and then a committee member, if there is one that can talk on that particular candidate's behalf,
Gotcha.
They'll step up and say, hey, well, you know, this is what I know about the kid. You know, his stats speak for themselves or whatever. And you know, and it's a good point that you brought this up, because, you know, what kind of stats do you have on an offensive lineman? You know, I mean, a defensive lineman, you could look at tackles or
Sure, right.
whatever, but, you know,
He had the greatest trap block ever. Well,
yeah. So that's really when you start relying on a coach or a committee member that, or a teammate or whatever that, you know, could validate that.
Would it be inappropriate to, if you nominate someone and maybe your coach, let's say you weren't even on there, to reach out to a committee member and say, hey, you know what, I turned this in. Here's kind of what I know to verbalize that. You know what I mean? To have an advocate in the room. Is that not copacetic, or is that?
No, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. I don't see that being an issue.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering, because you never know, because you get to a certain point, maybe you're not there, maybe you're not on it, or
when we met initially, I said, let's make sure that we don't get into a position where somebody has the ammunition to say, how's that person in? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe that there'll always be that. I don't know, but you try as a committee to be above that speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always, I don't know, and it would be interesting to see. Maybe initially there are those guys, like I think you said before, it's a no-brainer. Right, there's no debating it. Maybe that happens, but I think as you get a little bit deeper dive, that might be a little bit more difficult, and then subjectivity might come in. But especially with being a short time period of having it run, approaching 10 years off. Yeah, 10 years off.
And that becomes the major handicap of this, the 10 years off, because think about it. You got a guy like Brad Smith or Anthony Floyd, okay, that aren't in because of the time element. Chronologically. So
they're not in the Hall of Fame?
No, because I think,
but they're on the wall. So when they were on the wall, but they were not inducted into the Hall of Fame. Is that
correct?
accurate?
Because the Hall of Fame, they didn't meet the criteria as far as being out for such a long period of time. Okay. I think it was, I want to say 15 years maybe, and I think there's discussion being had now on maybe changing that. Okay. But you're still going to run into, okay, well, do you put that guy from 1940 that you know, the committee bypassed him, and maybe now he's
Well, he'd be
ready to be put in. You know,
he wouldn't be
posthumously,
yeah, right,
obviously,
right, yeah.
but do you put him in ahead of a no-brainer like that has a life-size picture up?
No, I think you're right. Yeah,
So that you know,
so you're
there's
probably
guys probably sitting out there that are thinking, well, you know what, maybe I have a shot to go in, okay, and then, well, I'm not going to get in before a Brad Smith or an Anthony Floyd or you know. DeLorean Collins or
Keelan Dykes,
or
whoever.
Yeah, whoever. You know, if I'm falling short on girl names, you know,
is Chris Durkin in, baseball player?
Chris Durkin is in.
Okay.
I'm 100% sure that Chris Durkin is in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to have larger classes in the beginning to kind of make
I don't see any way around this first class that comes back being less than like 20.
Yeah.
Which is good in a way because you know, like in Jaws, you're going to need a bigger boat. You're going to need to accommodate a lot of people.
You're going to have a long night because guys, people are going to get up there and talk, and they should have their moment. So it'll be
and look at what you got to do it like the Curbstone does. I mean, they designate you got 3.5 minutes.
Oh man, 3.5 minutes. That's rough. But I get you.
Yeah, it is, and not everyone abides to that, and they don't bring a hook or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I had down there was, and I don't mean this controversially, but, who's missing? Just, I did not realize. I assumed that I thought Brad and Anthony got in. I thought there was
and it would have been an automatic, but they just didn't meet the criteria that was established.
What did you know that the end was near for the Hall of Fame? So did you know that it was ending, or when the school closed it kind of ended, or things just kind of
it just kind of happened. It just, they didn't renew the licensure, and it just, we always knew that there was money in the account. Ed, I, and Jim Mullally were the permanent members, and that's because Red had given up that position.
Mm-hmm.
So then Ed brought Jim Mullally in. So the three of us became trustees or permanent members, however you want to say. And Tim Gleason was the president at the time.
Okay.
And then, like I said, when the school went, and no one knew how permanent that was, if that was, I think the thought process, if you'll indulge me here for a second, the thought process at the time was, all right, Chaney turned into a STEM school. Okay. Well, there is no more Chaney as a high school anymore. So consequently, anything that football, baseball, basketball, Hall of Fame, all those things vanish now because it's going to be, they're just not going to have any of those things anymore. Mm-hmm. And, should the committee have kept meeting? Yeah. And maybe Ed and I and Jim, maybe we dropped the ball on that by not keeping the committee alive.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are still people to be had to go in.
Yeah.
But that's how it turned out. I think everybody was in such was so shell shocked that that Chaney was no longer, as far as a sports entity, that it just caught everybody by surprise.
So 2009, 2010 is when that's the last class. What year did Chaney close? Right in that vicinity, right?
Yeah.
Okay, they didn't have sports, I think, right around there. I can't remember the
Yeah.
times, but so at that point in time, that's when, if I could guess, hey, we're just gonna take a break on the Hall of Fame. We'll see how this all plays out. And then just like anything else, if it's not on the forefront of your mind, things kind of, time flies by. We'll get together maybe next year, and then
yeah. And I think as long as no one was pounding on the door saying, "Hey, what about the Hall of Fame?"
Yeah,
it was kind of like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, and then see how it progresses, and that's where I think, to Seth, to Casey's point, Bogart and Antrim, they've initiated some of this by trying to reconnect, re-engage, and that's a lot of movement in the last 6 months, 8 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it'll be interesting. And not putting you on spot, are there applications that have been submitted, or is that probably something that just, if there's any questions, just resubmit everything? Would you think?
There's a database that has every application that went in and that are pending.
Okay.
So
okay,
there's information out there, and there's a whole bunch of information yet to come.
Okay. Yeah.
Because once they go public, and I think there's going to be a flood of applications.
Yeah, as there should be, right? Yeah. As there should be, because if those numbers are right, like you're saying, 15 years and different times, from a football standpoint, and from a baseball standpoint. And I can't speak to basketball. I just didn't follow. I know there have been some good basketball teams, but the vast majority of kids participating, that's when all the success started to happen. You started to see some much better teams in the early to mid 90s, late 2000s. So the timelines, right? Pope having some really good baseball teams, successful baseball teams. 15 years out, they wouldn't have been within that 10 to 15 year period either. So as you get better teams, you're going to start getting some people nominated for Hall of Fame. So yeah, there will be a lot.
Yeah, there will. So you that's where you have to not draw a line, but you have to say, okay, let's look at who's an automatic.
Right.
Who's we could look at applications from now until the middle of next week, but who is a can't miss?
Yeah.
And I think you're going to have quite a few of those.
Yeah. Well, you know what I started doing?
In all sports, and that's guys and girls.
Right. I mean, it's there's going to be a lot of work to be done, for sure. But it'll be enjoyable.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last thing, and then we'll wrap up. We've talked about a couple things on the podcast, and I just been thinking, what do you want to do after we get through the years? Because it's kind of like, we're getting a little bit closer. We can interview some more people, but I know we've been bouncing some ideas back and forth. This may be a good opportunity to get some feedback on what is interesting to people, or has it run its course? I don't know. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that there's a lot of guys that we've talked about and we've talked to about bringing on that'll offer, I think, very, very interesting perspective. And some of those, just off the top of my head, we need to have Alan Mikovich on. We need to have Dom Conti has indicated he'd come on. Dan Mancuso, and there's a whole bunch more. But so certainly we can represent other eras and bring in perspectives from those different guys. Also, we could go position wise, the best tailbacks, the best receivers, the best linebackers and whatnot. So I think there's an abundance of material that we can address and tap into, and that people would be very interested in. And I don't think it's limited to when those particular guys played. Look at, I think one of the best segments that we did, as far as hits, was the one on Red, and that's because there's such an array of people out there that fell under his influence. So there's a lot of material out there.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the first ones. So I think there was some intrigue and some interest. It was new, kind of like, wow, this is, you know what I mean? Like that piece. I think the yearly thing is important to kind of capture that. But I also feel like, and I don't mean this, you'll know what I'm saying, but I also think like the more we can expand it from here, out of just us two talking, it seems like when we talk to different people, interesting people, having more people engaged, I think that's probably the more intriguing part. Like when you were talking about bringing in some of the tailbacks or a position group, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so too.
And then it's not one person's perspective. You get different people talking about it from different angles, which is
maybe we could even get into a heavy argument with those tailbacks and who were the best.
Oh, I'm sure everybody there would know who the best one was themselves, right?
Yeah,
as it should be. And that's always a cool conversation, because how do you debate eras? How do you debate different times of the city? Who you're playing? Who was blocking for you up front? No, I think it's good, and I think that's we'll definitely finish through the years, get those highlight films posted, and get some input from the people that listen and see what they're interested in as well. So,
yeah, and Gene's book, West Side Saga. Every time I pick it up, I find a new tidbit. And there's some very interesting things, and real quick, two names I want to mention. Leroy Arrington from 93, 94, really a solid player for us. Was an all-city kid for us, and a name out of the past before my time, but I called Joe Lutzy the other day, was talking about him, because their careers kind of intertwined, meshed up. But Ken Ambrusco was, what I'm reading is, and there was a picture of him in Red's office that had his, a headshot that had Buffalo Bills under it, University of Maryland. was drafted in the first round, is what Gene's book says, and like the top 8. And then he had a catastrophic injury that ended it. And I couldn't tell you whether he is alive or passed. But, that's certainly, if you're there's talk now in the Hall of Fame committee about acknowledging the guys that went into the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And there's quite a lengthy list of 10 or 12 guys that have NFL contact, but I did want to mention those 2 names.
I think that's that's kind of the point of this. When you and I first started talking, it was about capturing the history, right? About the conversations that we've had behind closed doors, and some of those have made it on, and we're still working through some of them. The stories that you've always told. And, for example, being able to talk to some of those people that are of interest, either because they're a good player or they had an interesting career maybe after playing. And for example, we had talked about getting Gary De Niro on, and that opportunity tragically was,
right,
can't happen. And so I think that's the point, right? To be able to capture some of those things that one day we will no longer be able to hear, and to look back on them, listen to them, enjoy them, share with your kids, whatever. I think that still probably needs to be the focus of it. And how we do it, we'll see.
Yeah. And speaking of this Hall of Fame committee, I have had this discussion with Casey. I'd like to see some of the money that we raise out of a banquet go towards the development of a Hall of Fame area, Hall of Fame room, highlighting like I started to mention, the NFL players, as well as Casey just had a big board constructed of the 160 members, and that you could add to as the classes come in. And all the old pictures from the All City that used to hang in the lobby, and I think it would be a great centerpiece for the school, and where a lot of memorabilia can be revisited, and reunion or anybody can come in and visit that, a Hall of Fame room. And maybe it could be in the old lobby where all that stuff was, where the big pictures originally were. But
yeah, that would be a pretty special thing to be able to go in and kind of take a look at it.